Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us here today for our 2018 Edward Said Memorial Lecture. As always, just to get out of the way, if you could please silence the cell phones, just to avoid any interruptions. My name is Muhammad. I'm the Executive Director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. And on behalf of our Board of Directors and staff, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here today, as well as everybody watching online as well. Thank you. It's also a great honor to introduce and welcome back our distinguished speaker, Dr. Sami AlBanna, who will be giving a talk called Historic Turning Points in the Middle East, the End of the War in Syria and the Deal of the Century. The war in Syria is ending. Between defeat in Iraq and the loss of its war in Syria, the U.S. imperial dreams of regime change and domination in the region are coming to an end. Iraq and Syria paid the price for these U.S.-led adventures. The Deal of the Century, which was formulated as a way to end the rights of Palestinians on Israeli terms, and to create a new power bloc of Israel, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Gulf states to confront the emergent Russian-Iranian bloc. It's progressing, but facing rejection from all Palestinian political forces and Arab countries like Jordan, Egypt, and recently Saudi Arabia. These two important transformations are setting the stage for a new era in the struggle for justice, peace, and equality in the Middle East. In this talk, Dr. AlBanna will explore avenues of struggle and prospects for justice, equality, and democracy in the Middle East. Just to give a little bit of a background about Dr. AlBanna, he was born in Baghdad in Iraq, and he holds a Doctor of Engineering Science degree with honors from Columbia University in New York, a Master of Science in Engineering, also with honors, from the University of Rhode Island, and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, also with honors, from the Al-Hikma University in Baghdad. In addition to teaching for over 8 years as a member of the faculty of the School of Engineering at Columbia University, Dr. AlBanna has also served as an executive, a systems engineer, and a management consultant to governments, international organizations, businesses, and non-governmental organizations in more than 30 countries. He specializes in business transformation, smart systems, the internet, and knowledge systems. Previously, he served as a director at McKinsey & Associates and at Computer Science Corporation. Dr. AlBanna will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, after which we will have our Q&A session. As always, we ask you to please wait for the mic to ask a question so everybody online can hear. And everybody online can tweet their questions to us to @Palestine Center. Without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Sami AlBanna.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Muhammad. I want to thank the Jerusalem Fund for bestowing on me the honor to give the Edward Said lecture 15 years after his death. For over 35 years, until the end of his life, Edward and I were very close friends. A world-towering intellectual, Edward always spoke truth to power and to everyone, including his friends. Speaking the truth and being consistent in his moral position, along with his exceptional scholarship, is what enabled Edward to explore the role of the Orientalist and to defend the rights of the Palestinian people. Unfortunately today, where demagoguery, alternative realities, and bullies that are in power are rampant, the voice of the people that speaks the truth to power remains faint and limited. I, along with the progressives worldwide, missed Edward upon his death. I miss him even more today for the absence of his intellectual leadership in a very hard period in the history of the Arabs and the Palestinian peoples. To understand the current struggle in the Middle East, allow me to frame the current situation by using a quotation from Edward Said. From his speech at the University of Washington on May 8, 2003, few months before his death, titled Imperial Continuity, Palestine, Iraq, and U.S. Policy. And I quote, "Every empire, however, tells itself and the world that it is unlike all other empires, that its mission is not to plunder and control, but to educate and liberate." End of quote. Our American empire, in its policies and machinations, is no different from all other empires in the Middle East, particularly as applied to Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and other Arab countries. Like all other empires, the US empire manifests itself in the policies and behaviors in the Middle East, frames its knowledge base of subject people, in this case the Arabs, by framing, and of course recently the Iranians and more it goes, by framing a set of assumptions about the subject peoples, their history, and their culture. Social science and public discourse are used to expand the imperial knowledge base with more detailed, actionable knowledge against the subject peoples in order to control them, manipulate them, and to leverage them for the purposes of the empire. This vast pursuit of conceptual and actionable knowledge, as far as the Arab East is concerned, was elaborated in Edward Said's Orientalism and his other works. Similarly, and the same insights can be inferred from the extensive work on racism, imperialism, colonialism, and empire of public intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, Lawrence Wilkinson, Iqbal Ahmed, Christopher Hedges, Ralph Nader, Cornel West, Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X, Isabel Wilkerson, W.E. Du Bois, Martin Luther King, and numerous others. The body of that knowledge is vast. The imperial assumptions on subject people can be summarized as 1, otheration. Otheration of an inferior people, such as the Arabs, are backward people, albeit inferior people than as compared to the Western persons. This intellectual, social, and action-oriented processes are not different than what has happened to Black Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Africans in Africa, etc. We just make them the other. We then frame the other inferior or superior as we want, and that becomes allowable then. The second thing is a frame of supremacy over the subject people, enabling genocide and mass killing, such as has been happening to Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians, Lebanese, Yemenis, and the list is too long to list here. 3, sustaining intervention and pillage by manufacturing consent. This framework of supremacy and empire cannot be sustained without the consent of the citizenry, us in this case. Ehrman and Chomsky characterization of the press as an instrument of the manufacturing of such consent, and hence ensuring continued popular support for these imperial policies. Any discussion on Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Arab Middle East, etc., has to understand this imperial framework as it is actually applied, hence the struggle for the future of Syria and the future of Palestine. Let's talk about Syria. First, I want to start with a point of clarification. The point of clarification is critiques of methods of governance are not equal to call for the forcible overthrow of these governments. We do that every day here. Nobody thinks that we are overthrowing Washington. All right? Saying there are policies that are not acceptable or repressive is not the same as overthrowing the whole regime by force. There are many valid criticisms that one can have against the regime in any country in the Middle East, including Syria. The demand for equality of citizenship, human rights, and democracy are valid demands and must continue. No government, however, can or will tolerate raising arms to overthrow the regime, let alone an armed revolt fanned and subsidized by foreign powers. I revolt? Yeah. Okay. That's better. I'll do it here. The war in Syria has gone through. We are in phase 3 of that war, and phase 4 is coming soon. Syria has been in a state of war for over 7 years, approaching now 7.5 actually, as we speak. This was a world war in every sense of the word. The war was financed by many regional and international powers like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Turkey, France, England, the United States, plus several others, to an estimate that is now placed at $1 trillion. Think of that number, not billion, trillion dollar. $1,000 billion were invested to arm these the various terrorist groups. The war has ended in only one sense. The original objectives declared by the proponents of the war have now become unattainable. These were the objectives: the collapse of the Syrian regime, the Syrian government and regime, the removal of President Bashar al-Assad from power, and C, the establishment of a weak, fragmented regime in Syria, similar to the others in Iraq and Libya. Phase 2 of the war was to try to promote new groups to fragment Syria. I must point out that phase 1 effectively ended with the liberation of Aleppo. So when Aleppo was liberated, phase 1, to all practical degrees, the objectives became untenable. So we went to phase 2 of the war was to try to promote new groups to fragment Syria. Hence the rise of the Kurdish-led Democratic Syria Force, which is directly supported by the US and coalition forces. As part of this phase, the 10th base was established and grew into a major operational force to support US forces in Iraq and Syria. The establishment of the southern effort to separate parts of Syria near Israel, forces on the occupied Golans and in the city of Daraa. At the same time, after the liberation of Aleppo, the forces concentrated in Al-Ghouta, close to Damascus, which was being bombed regularly daily, from Al-Ghouta. Now, this is a map, incidentally, showing where a 10th is. The reason the location is very, very important, please note, it is in a point where the intersection of Iraq, Syria, and Jordan are, and it has a direct line into Jordan. This is how it is supplied, and it is used as a base on Syria and on Iraq. And that's still operational. So keeping that in mind, because we're coming to it and there's some development this week that may be interesting. Now, so after the end of phase 2, which was ended with the liberation of Daraa and the Golan, just about a few months ago, a month and a half ago actually. Phase 2 of the Syrian regime now the Syrian regime controls over 75% of the land, 85% of the population, all major cities and towns except Idlib and Al-Raqqa are under government controls. The areas outside the control of the government, as we speak, are the city and district of Idlib, which is in the north, and the surrounding areas, pockets in the north occupied by Turkey, large areas east of the Euphrates, and a 10th U.S. airbase. David Ignatius, writing in the Washington Post on August 30th, 2018, defines the current U.S. policy as, quote, right now our job, now remember this is August 30th, less than a month ago. Right now our job is to help create a quagmire for Russia and Syrian regime until we get what we want, says one administration official explaining the effort to resist an Idlib onslaught. This approach involves reassuring the three key U.S. allies on Syria's border, Israel, Turkey, and Jordan, of continued American involvement. Phase 3 commenced after the liberation of Al-Ghouta and the southern pockets in Dar'a and Golan. This phase saw the expansion of the U.S. presence in the east of the Euphrates and the expansion of the U.S. basin at 10th. This expansion throughout 2018, the U.S. has been sending troops and expanding at 10th Air Base and expanding its presence in east of the Euphrates. The creation of a 10th and another estimated to be 20 bases in East Syria have all been done without the approval of the legitimate government of Syria, the knowledge of U.S. citizens, I doubt many in here would have known about it, or the approval from the U.S. Congress. 20 U.S. bases, operational in East thing, aside from a 10th. A 10th is a major base. I mean, these are field bases and so on. The battle for Idlib is gaining momentum. It will likely start no later than the end of September, this September, and probably will be completed in October of this year. This escalation we are witnessing if Idlib is liberated because the biggest losers are the terrorists, Turkey, the US, and its allies. However, as of September 17, 2 days ago, and the agreement between Turkey and Russia, this is the Astana meeting between Erdogan and Putin, there might be no battle, but an approach to return the Syrian state without war. And that is why the drums of war have subsided, at least this week. Now, the Washington Institute, in a policy paper published on September 11 of this year, provided the following estimates of the fighters in the area of Idlib. And I quote, I don't know if I have this quote. Okay. Evaluating the exact number in Idlib today is therefore difficult, but it is certainly much larger than the 30,000 figure generally quoted and probably double that, end of quote. And I must point a few things. It's actually the majority of estimates in Europe and Russia is more like 60 to 70,000. It's in the States that they are saying 30,000. Second, there are more than 10,000 trained fighters among these terrorist groups that are from European countries and North American countries. And there is another 10,000 that are from Russian-speaking regions. That's how the Russian announcement declared. 10,000, with their families and everything. And then there is another 5,000 to 8,000 estimates that are from China. Okay, that is the real problem. What do we do with 25,000 plus families, plus 50,000 more, should Syria take over that? President Carter, in an op-ed editorial in New York Times on August 24th, and I quote him because this is really important. At their summit in Helsinki, Finland, in July, President Trump and President Vladimir Putin of Russia reportedly agreed to end the Syrian war and to move Iranian forces away from Syria-Israeli border. President Trump has also indicated that he is willing to accept President Bashar al-Assad remaining in office and is prepared to withdraw American forces from Syria. This is a start, but more is needed to end the violence in Syria. That's end of quote from President Carter. Now, on the other hand, President Carter is calling for peace and for ways to reach arrangement to rebuild Syria, yet the current US policy is tending toward more war and more expansion of the mission of the illegal US forces in East Syria. Ignatius, in the aforementioned opinion page, elaborates the objectives of the current US policy. Basically, I want to read this along a quote. He says, US goals in Syria have been sketched publicly by Pompeo and Mattis: withdrawal of all Iranian commanded forces from the country rather than just from 50 miles buffer zone along the the Israeli border, as in the deal that Russia arranged, and a political transition that can prevent Syria from becoming a terrorist base again and stabilize it enough and so forth, and wants more involvement. So there are two forces that are acting now, and one is a bulk of opinion seems to expand because it's all contingent on what happens in Iraq. And I don't want to go there because that's another a huge area to discuss. So for that, there is expansion of forces, both in Iraq, in Tenf, and in eastern Syria. All right? And forces have been moving there, pouring, as a matter of fact, the last few months. Second, there is another tendency to say, look, let's call it quit. This is becoming too expensive. And actually, President Trump yesterday, in a tweet, and then he had a press conference, said exactly that, is that we should find a way to really withdraw from there. So who is going to win there? I do not know. But we are... Now, the future of Syria. The end of the Battle of Idlib will open the door of the following developments that will likely be addressed over the subsequent 18 months. The next battle is for the east of the Euphrates and for the ending of the separatist enclave, which is supported by the US. Ending US presence in Syria. Ending Turkish occupation of territories in the north of Syria. Return of millions of refugees. The United Nations official estimate is about 9 million. That's all surround, Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and a little bit in Iraq. And then there is refugees inside Syria too. I mean, already over 1.5 million refugees have returned. So that is a good sign. The reconstruction of Syria, which has already started in earnest. We are living through the start of an important political transformation for Syria to a more democratic and more inclusive regime. The future for Syria and the Syrian people is bright and will be important for the rest of the Arab world. The return of a unified free Syria as a significant geopolitical power in West Asia, and the Arab world is an important factor in balancing forces against Israel and the US. Here lies the connection why a unified Syria free of civil war is important to confront the Israeli expansion and aggression against Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, etc., and etc. Every day they bomb somewhere. Now, and actually this morning Netanyahu says, we have the right to bomb anywhere we feel it is. So here we are. A little kid learning from a bigger kid. That's like the US. This is the link to the deal of the century. The US, Israel, and their allies are racing to establish new realities in the Middle East before the end of the Syrian war and its re-emergence as a regional power. Now let me go to the deal of the century. Okay? And of course, there's massive amount of talk about this. And the first thing I want to just put some cornerstones here. First of all, it's not really a deal. It is in the sense that we have experienced over the past 25 years. Since the Oslo Agreement. This week, 25 years, Oslo Agreement. And 40 years, the Camp David. So, you know, I mean, these are decades. I'm not talking months. Okay. These deals were based on a long trail of international agreements, UN resolution, and stated policies by countries, including the US, European countries, Russia, China, India, and the Arab and African countries. These were all based on UN resolutions like 224 and 338, with elaborations and details to make the various proponents plausible in reality. The deal of the century attempts to supersede that whole body of agreement dating back to 1948. Since 1948, the huge body of international agreements and resolutions and what have you has all failed for one and one reason only. Any other details is just for secondary discussion. Israel's rejection of the international body of these agreements and resolutions. Israel's rejection was sustained by US support in the name of refusal to pressure Israel. Okay? I actually, this morning, there was an op-ed in the New York Times in which the author basically says we have to stop thinking of the US as being supportive of Israel. It's actually now supportive of the right-wing factions of the Israeli Likud. Now, the deal of the century is a chain of decisions and impositions devised by the US reflecting Israeli plans and desires to abrogate all these international agreements since 1948 and to impose a new reality on the Palestinians and the Arabs. It may be called imposing a solution based on reality as it is, not on rights, nor on basis of justice. This is a US-Israel imposed solution, not a negotiated solution. It is devised to the detriment of the Palestinian rights. It is a mechanism to establish a new geopolitical reality in the Middle East. All the steps that Israel has taken for the past 70 years are being legitimized by unilateral US actions and decisions. 70 years of agreement and resolutions supported by the US are to be abrogated. Allow me here to make a very small departure. The approach that we are experiencing now is exactly how North America was colonized and the indigenous populations were pushed into isolated settlements. The process is simple. This is the process. First, you create realities on the ground, settlements, as in Israel's case. Second, abrogate all previous agreements and declare the new reality as legitimate. We've seen this in the US repeated over 150 years, in Palestine 70 years. They've been doing exactly the same thing. By force if necessary. So I declare it as legitimate. If you don't like it, I will use force to subjugate you. Offer new agreements to the natives. Force the native to accept the new agreement, repeat the process. That is the process that we are experiencing today. And that's the deal of the century. Essentials of the deal. The essential parts of the deal is rejection of the two-state solution, meaning rejection of Palestinian statehood or sovereignty. Second, rejection of the principle of sovereignty for Palestinian on any land within historic Palestine. Third, ending the concept of occupation. Hence, there are no occupied territories, nor are there refugees. Third, next, end the status known as refugees. And that's hence the UNRWA decisions and all the other decisions directed from that. And transforming the problem from occupation and sovereign rights on the human and economic problem for native populations that are not citizens nor a national group. And incidentally, the Israelis are doing their part from their side, which I'm going to talk about, which is what is the law, the Jewishness of the state law, which declares this to the world, saying that only Jews are citizens in Israel. Everybody else, they're just inhabitants. We'll find something for them to do. Now, components of the deal. The first started the process this way. They looked at all the top 3 obstacles that have besieged all agreements and negotiation for months and years. Okay, and they decided to take it off the table. Simple. It's an edict from the emperor. Negotiating obstacles that has besieged agreement past 27 years. 1, the status of Jerusalem by recognizing the sovereignty of Israel over all the city and relocating the U.S. Empire. By ending the support for UNRWA and demanding that the UN redefine the meaning of refugees from one evicted by force from Palestine and their descendants to only those evicted by force with no descendants. And that's the argument that took place in the UN, literally, where the US said, no, we want you to redefine this, just redefine it. So anybody who left Palestine by force will be considered a refugee. Most of them are dead now, okay? However, the descendants they have no rights anymore. Accepting the principle that all Israeli settlements are de facto part of Israel, and hence they cannot be part of any settlement. Notice, please, that the US has rejected this position in policy statements and approval of UN resolutions for the past 70 years. The last one of which was in December 2016, before the Trump administration, rejecting the principle that settlements are part of Israel. They are still part of occupied territories. Second, offer expanded, and here is the summary actually of what is being offered. Expanded Gaza as an alternative to self-administered area, but not a state, for the Palestinians. In other words, a limited self-rule under Israeli sovereignty. 3, further fragments the West Bank, and you know, if you are following the news and you know what's happening in Tel al-Ahmar, east of Jerusalem, this is part of the beginning of that phase. Link the small pockets to Gaza. Abu Dis, as a capital of Palestine, was a one-time offer to ease the blow. And now you're the capital of Palestine, says Trump. Once the Palestinians accept these arrangements, offer the Palestinians expanded Gaza, massive and social economic development in lieu of an independent state, where Gaza is the core connected by few ghettos in the West Bank by fast trains. I actually read a full plan detailing where these trains will be built and how they will be built and how they will be linked. And so I'm sure many of you have seen it if you are into that field. The economic component is to build a major airport, a major seaport, that is, a major airport, a major sea link to Limassol, Cyprus, or to Port Said, a major land links with trains and highways to Lower Sinai, and you will see why it's important for Lower Sinai. Economic investment in Northern Sinai and Gaza. This component is very important for building a strategic foundations in the broader plan for the Middle East, which I'll explain a few minutes later, in a second or so. The second arrangement, the security arrangements are simple. Give Israel everything it wants and needs. It's very simple. All security will remain in the hand of Israel, including land, borders control, airport control, seaport control. These include the borders of Israel and the Palestinian entity, whatever it is now will be called. The new Jewish state law promulgated a couple of months ago is part of this. It makes all non-Jews inhabitants without equal rights. Any other country on the face of this earth announces a law like this, you would have seen banners go up on race, apartheid, and so on. And yet in the US at least, that's not true in Europe, in the US at least, we heard nothing about it. Very little. This solution, if one calls it that, is a bonanza for real estate investors. Alibi Trump and his negotiating team. All of them are real estate developers. The whole negotiating team, except one person and the 4 people that he has assigned. All of them are real estate developers. Most of the Middle East team are actually investors, developers, and lawyers for investments in the settlements in the West Bank. So they're not only linked to real estate, they are linked specifically to the settlements in the West Bank. Now let's look at the broader geopolitical picture and why is this being pushed here in Washington with some fervor. The proposed solution has a broader implication for the strategic geopolitics in the Middle East. Create a massive economic bloc, includes Egypt, Israel, the Palestinian territories, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, connected by fast land transport. Egypt will provide human resources, massive markets, Suez Canal, oil and gas resources, and Israel will provide military and technology resources, the core of a dynamic new mass industrial market. Jordan serving as a bridge, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and its 2030 strategic plans, and the development of the city of Neom in Tabuk, Saudi Arabia. Now, I have to come back to this map because there are many explanations. The new Saudi Arabia, I'm quoting here from an article that I quote, the new Saudi Arabian government has come up with a project that could give its economy a boost, a 500 billion megacity that will connect to Jordan and Egypt and be powered completely by renewable energy. And I need to show you something, and I come back. Yeah. This is Neom. If you remember, for 2 years, there was a lot of uproar about the islands here, which were traditionally Egyptian, that Egypt surrendered to Saudi Arabia, and that was part of the deal. Because this development area, this is the $500 billion development area, will link to Sharm el-Sheikh. And there will be fast rails to the north, and this is another economic development area. I'm coming back to this because this is important for why this is the case. All these changes are to be paid for, and you would love this, to be paid for by oil-producing Arab countries, not by the US. Hence, create a sustainable economy for that's the dreamers of this plan. Sustainable economy for the survival of Israel, plus a bonanza for the American business community. This is the ultimate Zionist dream. I'll call it Zionist nirvana. Arab oil money, plus Israeli military technology and business, plus Arab markets in Egypt, plus other population centers if possible, like Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Sudan. 9. Why is the U.S. doing this? Is it really just to end the Palestinian case? Is it just to find a way for a solution in the Middle East? This is partly yes. These are all factors. But the bigger part is the broader geopolitics. Here are the factors driving the geopolitical factors, the broader geopolitical factors, global. U.S. needs to lower its military profile in the Middle East in favor of increasing its profile in East Asia against China and against Russia. This is, if you follow, please, the published documents from the DoD about 2011, and then there was another one in 2015, okay, because that's what's called the Strategic Outlook Plan. Strategic Outlook Plan speaks about what? That the major challenge to U.S. is coming from China, okay, and the Pacific area, and a resurgent Russia. Okay. Now, and here comes, I should conclude by saying here, and the second thing is, therefore, we need to increase our military posture in the East and lower it in things. This is, incidentally, was the main conflict between Obama administration and Israel. They wanted to lower the profile, and they wanted Israel to stop settlement and reach an agreement. Come Trump and his planners and so on, say, okay, we'll give you everything you want, we're going out. That's exactly what we are witnessing now. Now, U.S. planners see the emergence of a massive land and sea-based, energy-centric imperial challenge from the Chinese plan called the New Silk Road. And I have deliberately put this in red because the main concept of the Silk Road, which they are building right now, is a congregation, if you like, of the economy of Russia, the economy of China, and East Siberia development plan, which they just started, actually. I mean, just last month, they laid down this huge development project there. And they started the land roads. The concept of the road is to connect Beijing, Moscow to Europe by massive rails, energy pipelines, and to develop the Chinese-Russian East Siberia economic development region. Note that the rail lines have already been upgraded to connect via land Beijing to Moscow to Paris. Actually, there were several major celebrations in Moscow as well as in Paris of the first trains arriving. This is toward the end of last year. Now, also note the work has started on the two huge gas lines, pipelines projects. One is called the Northern Flow, which flows that way, and the Southern Flow, which flows this way. Russia to Europe, Turkey, and gas resources from Siberia. And if you really want to, just a small departure point, if you really want to understand the struggle over Ukraine, that is the struggle over Ukraine in a nutshell. These two pipelines, and the struggle over Turkey at the same time. Because all pipelines today from Russia pass through Ukraine to Europe. And the Russians have decided to divert with these two pipelines. They are very advanced in the northern pipeline. The southern pipeline was delayed a year because of Turkey hitting a Russian warplane in Syria. Then the rise of the Silk Road and the BRIC countries. The BRIC stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS countries, economic blocs challenge to the supremacy of the US dollars. Okay. Every economic forum that has been held in the last 3 years in China, Europe, and Russia. Many of them were big ones, and many of them openly. That is the key determinant. And I should point out that it's after the collapse of the invasion in Suez in 1956, the world decided that the British sterling pound will not be anymore the reserve currency of the world, and the British Empire collapsed. That's a very important turning point. That's why this is an important turning point. Iran in particular and Turkey are candidates for inclusion in the Silk Road if it emerges. It will create the largest sources of energy, oil, gas, and solar, human resources, markets, technology, industrial base, and agricultural base in the history of the world. E, ending the Palestinian rights and creation of the landmass economy based on NEOM, KSA, Egypt markets and populations, Jordan, Gaza, North Sinai development plus KS and Gulf money, and Israeli military, technological, and business leadership is conceived as a sustainable bloc against Iranian expansion and the Silk Road, especially the version of the Silk Road that includes Iran, Iraq, Syria, East Mediterranean, and Russia, and Turkey, of course. And that's, I mean, I don't want to go through too much departure here, but that's the kind of struggle that they are waging as we speak. And that's what is really sitting hard in Washington on this. Now, so that's basically the strategic challenge to the United States. And this is the Zionist nirvana. Okay? The Zionist nirvana is create this bloc, Israel becomes the center, Palestinians basically give them an opioid, and that's the end of the story. And that is the NEOM project. Let me talk a little bit about the struggle ahead, because I think I'm reaching the end of my time. The Palestinian people have suffered a lot for the past century for no fault of their own. It's really over a century if you really take the settlements at the end of the 19th century. Powers far greater than themselves lined up with the alien settlers to uproot them and deny them basic human, civil, and political rights. In spite of their small population and the far stronger adversaries, they continue to struggle and demand their right of self-determination on the land of their ancestors and the return of their homes, to their homes. In this context, their achievements are indeed outstanding. In our recent visit to Palestine, my wife and I, last December 2017, it was incredible to witness that the Palestinians have created functioning instruments of state in spite of the ever-present intrusive occupation forces. I mean, you can't turn there without a bloc or a military. Palestinian academics, intellectuals, artistic institutions are flourishing, propelled forward by an unbelievable energy of the youth and civil society. A lot remains to be done, and the struggle continues. Moral ascendancy. I'm going to tell you a story here which has a bearing on today. It's an old story, though. In early 1990s, Edward and Miriam returned from an invitation to visit South Africa after the collapse of apartheid. It was the same period when Edward discovered that he had cancer. I went to New York to have dinner with them. Miriam was understandably upset about the news. Edward, in his true self, described with precision the doctor's findings and declared that he will continue to fight it. Indeed, his battle with cancer was a lesson to all of us in the love of life and in dying with dignity. The conversation moved to the topic of the trip to South Africa. Edward reported that they met many political, academic, intellectual, and community leaders. He gave a number of intellectuals, a number of lectures, and many more discussion sessions. He explained, I kept asking people I met, how did you do it? Why is it that South Africa's struggle could succeed and the Palestinian has not yet triumphed? End of quote. Finally, in a closed meeting with the chairperson of the African National Congress, ANC, Edward got an answer, which remains true to our struggle today. The ANC person explained, quote, the reason for the success of our struggle is moral ascendancy. We struggle to establish the moral ascendancy of our cause and the moral bankruptcy of the apartheid regime. We leverage our moral ascendancy to lay an international siege to the apartheid regime until it collapsed. Edward asked, what about people mobilization? What about armed struggle? And what about strikes and protests? The ANC leader explained, yes, these are all important, but only to the degree that they demonstrate the will of our people, the justice of our cause, and the moral ascendancy of our struggle. Today, the world, except for US and Israel, but with significant portions of public opinion inside these two countries as well, support a just solution for the Palestinian people. This is a dimension of moral ascendancy. Let us not forfeit these great achievements by the blood of Palestinian martyrs, by the persistence of the Palestinian people, by the works of Palestinian artists, writers, engineers, scientists, academicians, farmers, refugees, innovators, civic organizations, BDS, and many more. The unequivocal rejection by all Palestinians of the deal of the century and the continued daily heroic struggles in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Gaza, inside Israel proper, and in the diaspora is another demonstration of moral ascendancy. The laws, like the Jewishness of the state and the actions of the US and Israel, are indeed moral bankruptcy. In the face of the darkness imposed on all of us by the Trump administration and the so-called deals, now more than ever, the Palestinians have to find the means to implement unity, unity, unity. Political unity, national unity, and unity of purpose, that these sacrifices shall come to fruition, and that the Palestinian people shall attain the rightful position among the peace-loving nations of the world, free, democratic, and actively working to build a vibrant economy. Another urgent task to all Palestinians at home or in the diaspora is to safeguard the Palestinian heritage and memories. It is time to regroup and to refocus all efforts to salvage and maintain Palestinian history, Palestinian culture, Palestinian traditions, and Palestinian affirmation of their rights to live in dignity, to exercise self-determination, to return to the homeland, and to the right to be free from mass killings, genocide, and collective punishment. The pursuit of Arab unity, any level of unity, remains valid and necessary. It, however, has to be based on principles of mutual respect, respect for life, open disclosure, and working together to solve societal and human problems are the surest way to reach convergence. The only way to overcome disunity is to accept diversity. respect all sides as equally valuable to the society and worth of love and collaboration to reach solutions that are fair to all sides. The fault lines of disunity, particularly those that are charged with historical memories, high emotions, and a lot of bloodshed, are hard to overcome and are easy to leverage by sinister forces. The Arabs were divided by massive such forces. The states that were formed after 1922, which we all decried in our youth, cannot be transcended except by the pursuit of unity and the preservation of the dignity of all concerned, and by avoiding civil wars and further fragmentation. We have to also focus Arab discourse on emergence of mega world trends like the Silk Road. It's going to affect us. It's going to affect all of us. Massive investments in the Arab countries and the rise of automation, artificial intelligence, and robotics that are the pillars of the fourth industrial revolution. And a final remark. Let us build on success and hope. Understand the failures of the past. Study them, ponder them, extract the lessons learned, but to avoid falling into self-recrimination and blame. We're very good at blame. Too good for our own well-being. Avoid finger-pointing on each other and understand that social and economic change is difficult and needs patience and a recursive process of self-reflection and learning. In the dialectics of the struggle, there are many losses and many gains. Obviously, the struggle for Palestine is undergoing massive challenges, but remains valid and necessary for justice. The struggle for unity in Syria and a democratic system for all Syrians to enjoy citizenship under the law remains a noble pursuit, and thank you.
Dr. Sami, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation. It was a pleasure to have you here. We'll take questions now. So,
thank you, Mohammed. My name is Saeed Erekat. I'm a Palestinian journalist. First of all, I want to thank you because you're the first one to draw a line, a direct line, between the war that is being waged on Syria and the liberation of Palestine. So I want to thank you for that because there is a direct connection. My question to you, you of course project or convey elements of hope, especially after your last visit and so on. But in fact, the Palestinians I talked to seem very desperate. Where ought the focus be, from henceforth? What are the priorities? What is the discourse that the Palestinians should be involved in? Thank you.
The quick answer to your question is too expensive to be depressed. Okay? And it's getting more expensive.
Should we just stand with the talk about the two-state solution?
Yeah, no, but
refocus?
No, you see, you probably don't know this, but I was on the debate on the two-state, one-state, single-state, democratic Palestine since its beginning until it's, okay? In hindsight, I'll tell you, it was important for us to learn. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Apologize. It's important for us to learn. However, it doesn't matter. Two things matter, as far as I see it. Thing number one, the Palestinian Authority has attained a lot of recognition in the world. There is no reason to forfeit it and make a freebie for Israel. So on one front, diplomatic world thing, we should insist on the two-state solution and so on. We all know objectively the conditions of an independent state has long gone. But what is more important than the condition of that is to build sustainable Palestinian institutions, whether it is in education, whether it is in culture. You know, I went and visited several universities in the West Bank. And I tell you that several of them are highly impressive. There is tremendous dynamism, and they can be sustained. There are many cultural institutions we visited, and these have to be sustained and supported and advanced. Any institution that advances the Palestinians as a people, as a culture, as a tradition, as a thing, is important for the struggle. We are not going to go away. And that's not a declaration, that's a mere fact. And the harder we make it to have them take us away, the easier it will be to gain some justice. I can't predict the future, but I can tell you the elements that will shape the future.
Hi, Dr. Sami. I'm Helena Cobbin. How are you? How do you explain the fact that so many supporters of the Palestinian rights movement in this country have become very much mobilized around the regime change campaign in Syria? And then what do you suggest be done to overcome that very serious split inside the Palestinian rights movement?
Thank you, Helen. This is a very, very important question. I agree with you. There are a number of factors, okay? And I ascribe it to a number of factors. I don't like it. I don't agree with it, but there are a number of factors. Give you a few of them, please. There was an opinion in the Palestinian movement, even back home, not here, okay, that the diplomatic path that was taken, which engaged the United States, will render some fruition. I'm not of that opinion from the beginning. I always thought it's important to engage, but don't bank on it. Okay, big powers don't just simply serve lesser powers. Now, that unfortunately had the effect on many of the movement that says it's important for us as Palestinians to really sort of maintain that balance and so on. Actually, if you go back to the Middle East, you will see a totally different picture. And I spoke to a lot of the people in authority in the West Bank, for example, or in Gaza. They all recognize, for example, that the fragmentation of Syria is another disaster on the Palestinians. They all recognize, I have seen no dissent. And I could tell you many of them are mortal enemies of Bashar al-Assad, if I can put it that way. But realistically, they know without unification, without Syria united, without Iraq united, without Lebanon united, without some unity on the Arab world, a major leverage point for the Palestinian is lost. You know, if you talk to Abbas' inner circle, they will tell you he has been sort of, at least their view, he's trying to pull many horses so that it doesn't turn against the Palestinians, but it has. Let's face it. How we address it, I think, one is to really discuss these matters openly, and the second is to persist that the unity and the independence of the Arab country is sacrosanct. And no, the moment, and I know it in Iraq, I was against Saddam long before there was an Iraqi opposition. The moment it shifted to an Iraqi opposition bought by England and bought by the US and bought by Iran and bought by so on, I attacked them all, and yet I took a position against the war. Big countries do not go to small countries to liberate them. I mean, face it. So the same happened to the Iraqis that is happening to the Palestinians. I 100% agree with you. It is worth the struggle to try to stop that trend and to try. And then there's other machinations that it will take time to sort out.
So earlier when you were speaking of the deal of the century, you talked about how the light rail system would connect the expanded Gaza to, you called them Palestinian ghettos on the West Bank. So given that we understand that those will be Bantustans, I'm not sure I understand why you say that you should continue to support the Palestinian Authority when the Palestinian Authority is also a Bantustan government, where when it gets legitimacy, it is only legitimate in its capacity as collaborators with the occupation. Like in South Africa, we wouldn't say that it's good that the government of KwaZulu is getting representation when the government of KwaZulu is a Bantustan that only exists at South Africa's mercy to be an agent of South Africa's oppression?
It's an excellent question, actually. And I will, my answer to you goes back to South Africa, actually. Okay? Until the rise of the ANC, any progressives in the world should have supported the Bantustan governments. Until the rise of the ANC. Because the ANC represented a new force that needs to be supported over the older forces. Unfortunately for the Palestinians, till now, we do not have a unified or a representative movement. And therefore, while I criticize heavily the Gaza government, and I criticize heavily the Ramallah government, I am not willing to give up either of them and hope that they find a way. If they don't, many things will be lost. Okay? So the push for unity doesn't mean I agree with them or with the policies, as I said in my speech. It only means to keep on hammering from outside, from inside, from everywhere, that Palestinian unity, Palestinian institutions, and building of Palestinian rights is a critical matter. Approaches may differ. I don't agree with many of the approaches, but I'm not willing to condemn it.
First of all, thank you very much for your speech. I really enjoyed it. My name is Dina Fox. And is this better? Okay. Kind of a question here about the PLO office. And I'd like to know from you what the impact of having that office closed by the Trump administration would be. That's number one. Number two, as I understood you, you indicated that the United States had stepped up its presence in Syria quite a lot. Could you please put some figures on that? In other words, what are we talking? You mentioned 20 bases in addition to the major one. But what are we talking about in terms of military presence? Thank you.
The PLO, the closure of the PLO office was both expected and sad. It is part of the continuing line in Washington today that basically says, if you do not do what we are telling you, we're going to punish you on a small scale. And I'll give you an example. Before they closed the Palestinian office here, by about a week or two, there was a special fund set way back, way back in the 50s, to support hospitals in East Jerusalem. It's a small, $50 million. They canceled that first. Was it 25? 25 million, okay? They canceled that first. That's vindictive. I mean, how can you, so the closure of the office is to say, I am the boss, I am the guy with the big stake, and I'm going to keep on clobbering you until... Do you know that there was a debate last week, and I don't know what happened in Palestinian press. over whether Abbas is coming to the UN to give a speech or not. And you know what was the purpose, what was the reason for all of that speculation? Because the Americans indicated they will not grant him visa to the UN. Okay? So you know, I mean, it is borders on total vindictiveness. There is not even a policy dimension of it that they can, Trump and his cohorts can point to and say, I am achieving this result. It's just, we're going to punish you because you're small compared to us. That's it. The second question, the declared number, the official declared number of troops, fighting and non-fighting troops, about 3,000. That's of US. DOD, and plus there is another maybe 1,000 UK and another 1,000 French forces, particularly in the north, the French. Now, the real numbers, however, from what I could gather from Arab sources, closes more on 10,000. If you add a tenth, because tenth, if you look at all the numbers, there is no number for the tenth. Okay? Including the tenth. Now, 10,000 is plenty. Right? They escalated because of not only Syria, I must point out, but also because of Iraq. And that is why I think, and they just escalated the naval presence in the Gulf. And today, they escalated, this morning, they escalated naval presence in the Mediterranean. They're beefing up forces. So is the French. The French also moved more troops. It's very dangerous now in Eastern Mediterranean. You know, as the incident yesterday over Latakia pointed out, a small mistake might trigger a whole world war. Okay. Thank you.
John Duke Anthony, President of the National Council on U.S.-Arab Relations. I have two unrelated questions, they're both short. Come back to South Africa, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that essential to the ending of apartheid there was that you had an incumbent government with leaders who had a conscience and yielded to it or expressed it, de Klerk and others. So far, such an Israeli leader has not been incumbent nor seen on the horizon or over the horizon. So the implications of that. And the other one, where would you place Iran in this overall scheme? It exists in some people's New Silk Road scheme, and almost half of Israel's existence, the first years, Israel and Iran slept together. They both share a degree of strategic unity in fearing Arab unity or Arab influence increasing in Washington, D.C. Might you comment on these two questions?
Forgive me, the first one was?
South Africa and the need for leaders with
right.
a conscience and not afraid to express it.
I do not think in the horizon we see a Jewish leader in Israel of the caliber you're talking about. Actually, there's a very interesting episode that happened only 2 days ago. Barak, the old prime minister, made a speech in which he was denouncing Netanyahu, and he used the following phrase and said, Netanyahu, you have to watch out, you are going on the path of Ceausescu of Romania. The second day, which was yesterday, Netanyahu said he's considering taking Barak to court because that is, you're agitating for my murder. Okay? So, and that is the level of discourse I'm talking about. Now, all people inside Israel, and I know a fair number of them too here, believe the reason why this right wing is because that's what America wants. So if they believe that America wants Netanyahu get elected, and he keeps on marketing that I am the chosen one from the United States. That is no justification for moral cowardice, in my view. But many conditions have to change worldwide until such a we see the emergence of such a leader. The only question in Israel today is whether Netanyahu remains in power or not. All of his antiques and so on are to prevent his two cases, his two corruption cases, from going through the courts. Okay, that's all. Okay, so it's self-survival, and he's going to go to the extreme. Of course, now a little bit strategically to come to your second question. It is always in the interest of Israel to have a big threat. Before it was the Arab coalition, Egypt, after that, and now it's Iran. Okay? Is Iran really a threat to Israel? I don't think so. Okay? However, we go to the other question, and that's the question that is baffling or unfortunately misguiding a lot of Arab leaders. There is no doubt that Iran is a resurgent power. It's coming up very strong in every sense of the word. Technologically, I mean, you don't look at one parameter. They may have some difficulties economically, they may have other difficulties, but technologically, their presence, Shia influence, and all of that. Part of that, a small part of that, is the stupidities that were committed by the United States in Iraq. I mean, let's face it. Second, and I go back to Obama actually, when he was faced with the same question, this was his answer, if you recall, 4 years ago actually. He said, our recommendation to the Saudi leadership is sit down on the same table with Iran and talk it over. Okay? And he, in this case, I agree with him. I am from Iraq, and I don't like the role that Iran is playing in Iraq. But that is different than saying, but it has a resurgent power in Iraq that is not to be ignored and so on. What is most important for the Iraqi people? At this moment, political unity and rebuilding Iraq. So if I have to appease Iran, I have to appease Iran. We're not going to stop Iran by these antiques. We're making it stronger, actually, by the antiques that are now, big, what they refer to it, I think Trump referred to it as the Middle East NATO. Okay? They just had exercises last week in Kuwait, right? How do you build a military force against Iran? If you combine all these forces, plus Iraq, plus maybe Syria, they can't stand to Iran. Okay? But that's not the issue. The issue is find a mechanism where it is a win-win to Iran and to the Arabs. The second issue, which is even more important than the first one in my view, is Arab unity. Without an Arab bloc, you cannot talk to the Iranians and say, I am equal to you. If you want Iraq versus Iran is nothing. Syria versus Iran is nothing. Saudi Arabia versus Iran is nothing. But if you really want to say, look, here is some platform of Arabs where Arabs will agree on some limited platform, then Iran will have to listen. And the same thing with Turkey, incidentally. I mean, why is everybody so concerned about Iran? And, what about Turkish expansion into Syria, into Iraq? So the same formula has to work. The Arabs have to feel strong and secure in their countries and find a platform that is a win-win to them as well as to the other side. I don't care how honest or dishonest Erdogan is. I do care what he does in invading North Syria and North Iraq and sending troops here and sending troops there, and we went to the brink of a major war in Idlib only this week. So that's my only answer to you, because there is no, I mean, look, balance of force issues means you have to have force on the ground. It doesn't mean I can boost the force, okay? If people feel that powerful, they should show it, but they don't.
I'm Jim Vitarello. I've been involved in Middle East peace for many years. And I'm a pretty good history buff on the Middle East, even though I'm an Italian American and really have no sort of skin in the game, but I've always been interested in the Middle East. So first of all, before I ask you my key question on Syria, where I think you're very optimistic about the democratic forces in Syria, which I haven't seen any evidence of. But before I answer that question, I would like to strongly disagree with your assertion that Israelis only vote for prime ministers that the Americans support. I agree that with Bibi now, that's certainly the case. But if you go back to the Sharon-Bibi election in 1995, right after the assassination of Rabin, you remember that Clinton was a big supporter, of course, of Perez, right? But Perez made two big mistakes, if you remember. He wound up assassinating the engineer, despite Arafat's promise that he would keep him in house arrest and so on. And also that terrible massacre of the Palestinian refugees up in Lebanon. Right? And it's because of that, as you know, and I'm just saying this because the audience may not know this, that the Palestinian Israelis boycotted that election. And they wound up, Perez wound up losing by only 1 percentage point without any Arab support at all in Israel. Had he had that, he clearly would have beaten Bibi. And Clinton was obviously very disappointed that Bibi was there. And in fact, he had a big fight with Bibi afterwards, as you know, in different places. So I just want to let you know that at least in that one case, that's not true. But let me get back to Syria, because I was honestly very shocked and disappointed in your characterization of what's going on in Syria. First of all, in the very beginning, you never mentioned, for example, that people were being assassinated by Assad's intelligence while they were marching. All right? I saw pictures of it in Frontline. They clearly did that. They were dropping barrel bombs soon after that in Syrian civilian neighborhoods. They were bombing hospitals and so on in the early first phase, which then, of course, led to all the horrible terrorists and whatever that came in. So they were clearly provoked by Syria. The other point is, you said that there are now democratic forces moving in Syria, despite the fact that Assad is clearly entrenched in power. He has his buddies from Iran and Hezbollah and, of course, the Russians, all propping him up. What makes you think that he would ever give up power and allow a democratic Syria? I just don't see it.
Have a discussion.
Do you want me to answer this question here?
Yeah. Answer that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. The situation inside Israel hasn't been always the same. Okay? It varies heavily with where the Israelis position themselves vis-a-vis their alliances. Remember, throughout the 50s and the early 60s, it was England and France that were shoring up Israel. America was supportive, but a bit distant from that, right? So their positions, and obviously I will go further than that, in the 90s with Clinton and so on, the entrenchment of American support became more so with George Bush when we entered Iraq and we entered the various forces. The balance shifted heavily toward America. and the Israeli link themselves more and more to America. Before, even 10 years ago, if you really go back 15 years ago, they would listen more to what Paris says, to what London says, to what Berlin says. Now they don't listen to anybody except Washington. So my point there is a synergy today between Israel support and between Washington machinations. And that synergy has to be broken before we go back to some semblance of saying, is Washington going to support me forever and protect me forever? That's the answer to that question. The second point you made, I do not accept, I'm sorry. Okay? I have been following with detail the machinations about Syria and Iraq way back in Clinton time. Not George Bush, Clinton time. The resolution to overthrow the government of Iraq by US Congress, overthrow the legitimate government of another country, was in 1995. And $50 million were budgeted for that. And the resolution to overthrow the government of Syria was taken in 1996 by the same Congress and signed into bill by Bill Clinton. Machinations to start work on subverting the government of Syria started in earnest in 1996. Here in Washington, in the Virginia side, I could take you there and show you where they have the conferences in, right near the CIA headquarters. Okay, and they started going to Europe, and I know a lot of them personally. And all of a sudden, they're showing up in Washington, and they're calling me, "Hi, how are you? What are you doing here?" He's, "Oh, well, we have this important conference that later I discovered was part of the CIA efforts to begin the process of overthrowing." They established a center for that, just so that we can put in history. In 2011, when the whole thing started, the so-called bombs and so on and so on, in 1999, they established a center in Frankfurt. And they established another center in Holland to recruit and train people who all became part of the so-called opposition. Okay? So all of this, I didn't write about this, incidentally. I can send you the authoritative people who wrote about it and who traced it back into this.
So who was shooting the Syrian?
I do not know who is shooting, and I could tell you, it may be obvious to you, it's not.
Had a great documentary.
I know, I saw it. Yeah.
The barrel bombs were not dropped by these people. They were dropped by Assad, on his own people.
There is not, just like I do not trust Western sources for one reason.
You can't trust Assad, man.
I can trust Assad.
You can't, if there's robbing,
Why?
to his own people?
I can trust him far more than I trust the CIA.
I hope Viva Syria.
Viva Syria, yes.
Can we continue? Yeah, let's continue afterwards. Okay, all right, sure.
Thank you.